Everybody in Spring Grove had a nickname. There was Squirrely Ash, Happy Wagner, Jerky John, and Skunk Orvis. All those people really lived. My father's nickname was Shorty, Shorty May. He wasn't that short. He was about my size, but he was the second boy in the family of a family of 12, and I think my Uncle Ben, the oldest, tagged him with that nickname Shorty. He was 51 when I was born. My mother was 42. We were a Catholic family, and I was a rhythm baby. My mother always said that we Catholics were always thinking about two things, rhythm and bingo. And if the rhythm didn't work, bingo. So I was bingo. A delightful surprise, my mother said. I think after being surprised for 9 months, they were delighted once I got there, because I did kind of get spoiled, being the baby. Now, in folklore and fairy tale, the young son born to aging parents is the young prince goes off to seek his fortune. I've tried to get my older brothers and sisters to think of me as the young prince rather than the spoiled baby of the family, but that's been slow going. There are advantages, though, to being an afterthought. And in my case, when I was about 6, before the days of kindergarten, my older brothers and sisters were either married or working or at school. My mother was working at the Woodstock typewriter factory to supplement the milk check, and my father and I got to be together there every day on the farm, and it was a great way to spend my 6th year. I remember riding up on the big tractor seat with him, those big old iron seats with the holes in them so the rainwater could drain out, and there was plenty of room for both of us up there. Coming back in from the field during the warm weather, we'd stop sometimes in the lane under the chokecherry tree. I'd climb up there and pick the chokecherries, and we'd sit there and eat them. Now, they don't call them chokecherries for nothing. They're bittersweet at best, but I liked sitting there in the shade with my dad, eating something that had grown wild there on our farm. It was times like that he would have me listen for the sounds of birds. We'd hear the meadowlark singing from a rail fence or maybe from the furrow in the plowed ground. And he could make a sound like a bobwhite quail. Now, we didn't have many quail then. They'd been hunted out, and we're kind of the northern edge up there of their range anyway. But years later, I heard a quail in a woodlot in Virginia one evening. I knew just what it was. It sounded like Shorty May. Now, I had a feeling that I was really helping him, that I wasn't just tagging along. I could drive the tractor in a manner of speaking when I was 5 years old. He'd pull the tractor in a hay rack down into the cornfield in the middle of summer when the corn was tall and green but still tender, and he would cut it by hand with a corn knife and throw the corn stalks onto the hay rack. I would hold the clutch down. He'd put it in first gear, the tractor. I'd hold that clutch down, and when he had a lot of corn cut, so he had quite a distance to walk back and forth, he'd yell, "Go!" And I'd let that clutch up real slow, it was first gear. He didn't want it to jump. And the tractor and wagon would pull ahead to where there was more standing corn. He'd have a lot of corn to cut real close to the wagon. And then he'd yell, "Whoa," and I'd put the clutch back in. And I knew that I saved him a lot of time and effort climbing on and off of the tractor. He was 59 years old and farming 300 acres by himself, and I think even then I was aware of his age. I was also the official hooker-upper. If there was a wagon to hook up, I'd hold the wagon tongue, and those days was mostly four-wheeled wagons, so a young boy could hold it. There was no weight on the tongue, and he'd back the tractor up, and when the hole in the drawbar matched the hole in the wagon tongue, I'd slip the pin in, we'd be hooked up. I knew that was a job that was impossible to do if you're working alone, so I felt like he and I were really partners in the farming business. Now, there were times when it wasn't fun, times when I had to stay back at the house alone. I didn't like those times. And I recalled it was the spring of the year. It was the time of the year the McHenry County farmers say you plant your corn when the oak leaves are the size of a squirrel's ear. And that was the time of the year. And he said, "I'm going to plant tomorrow, but you've got to stay back at the house." And I thought it was a terrible injustice at the time. I think, though, with our planter, we had a planter converted from a horse-drawn, so you had to turn around and put it in gear manually and drop the row marker down so the rows would be straight. There was a lot of moving around. Maybe he thought I'd get bumped and fall off. Farming is dangerous work. So he said, "I want you to stay back at the house. I know you'll be alone, so if there's trouble, just ring the bell." Now, we had a shanty attached to the house with an old rusty bell on the top, on the roof. I had never heard it ring. I figured it was maybe used in days when there was more farm hands, or perhaps it was ever cooking in the kitchen was working on a cook stove and couldn't be sure when that supper would be ready, so they all listened for the bell, but I had never heard it ring. There was an old greasy hemp rope tied off high on a beam there. He climbed up, my dad did, let it down, said, now you pull on that rope and ring the bell if there's trouble. It's not to play, but if there's trouble, you ring the bell. Well, the next day, it was mid-morning, I guess, and I was getting antsy, waiting for him to come in, and thought I'd go over in the shanty there, kill a little bit of time. It was kind of an interesting old building. It was much too narrow, for the big cars we had in the 50s. It was built for carriages. Now, they use those shanties now. Those shanties went kind of right from buggies to Toyotas. But back then, there was just some rusty license plates nailed to the wall and a few bald tires. But I'd usually find some greasy, rusty thing to play with in there, So I went inside the shanty, and when my eyes had adjusted to the dim light, I saw our dog Bootsy there, and she was laying in a dirt hole. Now, you always think of farm dogs as being big, shaggy collies. My dad always liked to cross these rat terriers with chihuahuas. And that was Bootsy, little yappy dog. She'd get right behind the cows and bite them in the heels, and they'd kick right over the top of her. It worked out pretty well. But anyway, Bootsy was laying there, and about 3 or 4 feet from her was a snake. I looked up at that rope and kind of liked the idea of ringing that. Looked back at that snake, and I thought, this could be trouble. Looked back at the bell, looked back at the snake. That snake seemed to be getting bigger with a more serious expression on his face. So I decided that was trouble, and I went over and grabbed the old greasy rope and gave it a pull. When the rusty side of that bell hit the clapper, it just sent a low toll out over those fields. Pigeons got up off the barn, and the heifers jumped around in the pasture with their tails straight in the air. I don't think they'd ever heard that sound either. I liked it so much I rang it again. And when the toll had drifted off, I heard another sound. It was the engine of my father's tractor. Every tractor sounds different, and it was his. He had heard the bell, and he was coming in from the field. It wasn't long before I saw the stream of smoke over the corn crib, and then him coming around the corner of the tool shed, really moving. He had the old Farmall International H tractor in road gear. Now that was unusual for him because he farmed most of his life with horses, big muscled Percheron and Belgian horses with feet the size of serving platters and withers as tall as a man's forehead. And he could do anything with those big horses. He loved them, but he never quite trusted tractors. He'd always drive up there, second gear, maybe third gear, kind of slow. But he was really moving that day, so I knew he was worried. He came to where I was standing and throttled down, braked, and turned the key off. You know how quiet it gets when a big engine like that shuts off? He looked at me and he said, "What's the trouble?" I said, "There's a snake over there by Bootsy." Well, it was a garter snake. It was about 7 or 8 inches long. Disappointingly non-poisonous, and I thought I was in trouble. But he looked at me, said I was bugs, but then he let go with kind of a breath, like he was relieved that I was all right. And we had an early lunch, listened to the farm report after lunch, and when the music came on after the farm report, he didn't do a little two-step across the linoleum like he usually did to make me laugh, so he might have been madder than he let on. And I never rang the bell again. We sold out the following March 1st. We had a sale and moved into town. And he got a job working in a factory there in Richmond, Illinois, which must have been hard for him being a farmer all his life, but he never said much about it. But the second spring of that job, he got laid off and got a job working on a Lipizzan horse farm there in Spring Grove. A herd of Lipizzan horses had been brought over from Austria. It's the largest herd in the United States. And he got a job working there, and that was a real gift because he was put in charge of the brood mares. So we'd go in the wintertime and sit up with the mares and watch them have their foals. There wasn't much to do but just sort of sit there in amazement and watch. We welcomed a lot of black, spindly-legged Lipizzan foals into the world that winter. But one day he was moving one of the big horses, one of the stallions, from one box stall to another. And the horse got away from him. There was a lot of tugging on the lead and a lot of stress. And my father had a heart attack and died when I was in high school. And it's true with me, it's true with all of us in growing up. There was trouble and times when I ached to pull on the old rope, but I didn't have a bell to ring and he didn't have a tractor to come on in from. And this story has sat idle for a lot of years, just like the old rusty bell. But lately, as I've been telling it as a story, it's like pulling on the rope. And when I look out to you and see in your eyes that you can hear that bell or a bell of your own, then I know I've rung it. And when I think that all of you good people now know a little bit about Shorty May, then I can hear the tractor coming too. Thank you.